Okay. All right. So thank you all for having me today. Again, my name is NicoleRusso. I'm the Director for Quarantine Policy Analysis and Support with PPQ. Hopefully I can answer your questions related to e-commerce. I know that this has come up a lot during this meeting. So, if there are any things that I do not address, I'm looking very forward to answering those during the Q&A session, or you can reach out to me directly. So next slide. So I said we've been speaking a lot about e-commerce during this meeting, and this is really truly a government-wide topic of interest across multiple agencies, I'm sure, as well as the states. So I want to provide some background as to where we are with this topic and where we are going. And admittingly, the first few slides are going to kind of sound awful, and as we get through the presentation, things will start to sound a little better, and hopefully by the end, you'll realize that we have a lot of things going for us that I think are going to pay off in the next few years to be able to address this pathway more effectively. Now, as I said, we refer to this as a pathway, but it doesn't really align to how we view a pathway in terms of our regulations or how we evaluate pest risk. To us, a pathway is more of a mode of entry, such as a train, different vessels, the commodities, or international mail. It's how the products get into the country. Our regulations are set up to manage the risk of products or conveyances. Our regulatory requirements don't change based on the manner in which the goods are purchased. So e-commerce is really just a business model to facilitate sale. Whether you buy goods at a brick and mortar store or from an online retailer, whether it's Walmart or eBay or Amazon or really any website, those products and goods are subject to the same regulations and requirements as any other cargo or product entering the United States. The problem lies in the fact that our import paradigm is really designed for goods to be imported on a large scale in commercialized shipments. And this doesn't always meet the needs of the direct-to-consumer foreign sales. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be giving my credit card to any website in which I found really cute, Christmas presents on, I would say you were crazy. But that's really how we're operating now, is that we are more and more buying things online with really less understanding as to where those goods are coming from or how they're being sourced. So there are two main pathways for small parcels into the United States, and each have their own unique challenges and opportunities to capitalize on. Next slide. The first pathway I want to talk about is international mail, and this is under the authority of the United States Postal Service. There are currently 9 international mail facilities where mail comes into this country and is inspected for agricultural compliance by CBP, Customs and Border Protection. Now, CBP also has additional roles, and there's other federal requirements for mail, but CBP ag specialists are in these facilities conducting agricultural inspections. Now, historically, international mail has arrived with really minimal advanced electronic data. And when we say advanced electronic data, that's essential for us to focus our inspections on high-risk material. Now, recently, CBP has implemented requirements of the STOP Act, and this was an act, I think around 2018 or 2019, which was synthetics trafficking and overdose prevention. The STOP Act was focused on mandating advanced data on international mail from high-risk countries, specifically to address drug trafficking enforcement. Now, existence of this new data stream is really opening doors and how we look at this pathway for agricultural risk, and for us to see how much information we can gather from it to really show and target our inspections. Now, despite the lack of advanced data, I need to give CBP really a lot of credit for what they are able to accomplish. This is a high volume, extremely challenging environment to conduct inspections. And in FY20, CBP inspected over 179,000 mail parcels, and they found over 69,000 plant QMIs, or quarantine material intercepted. and 11,000 animal products in addition to that. Now that's a 35% success rate for APHIS regulated material, which is, considering the volume, is really quite amazing. Now these numbers are not meant to highlight that this pathway is exceptionally dangerous or not dangerous. What those numbers show is that CBP is able to target inspection in a pathway despite the high volume and limited data available. So imagine what more data could potentially open doors for us in that environment. But we all agree this is a leaky pathway. You know, the unsolicited seed issues that we all saw in 2020 really highlighted that. But increasing inspection may not be the best long-term approach, considering the rate of return. You know, there are millions of parcels coming in via international mail. In fact, CBP X-rayed over 69 million pieces of mail in 2020. So more inspections may not be the only or the best solution for this particular pathway. Next slide, please. The second pathway is a cargo pathway. It's small parcel cargo, and specifically referred as an express courier pathway, or ECOs. And it has similar challenges, but is slightly different because it is a cargo pathway. Unlike international mail, express courier packages require the filing of an entry. So entries are mostly electronically filed, and they come in through the automated commercial environment, which is CBP's custom system. And that data allows more effective targeting for inspection of agricultural products. The one issue that we have here is that most of the electronic advanced data requirements for small parcels are waived when the value of that shipment is under $800. It's a de minimis exception. And when you think about what you purchase online, you know, how many of those individual items are under $800? There are quite a number of things that you can get from a foreign country well under that $800 threshold. And so again, that's not a threshold that was set up for risk. That's a threshold that was set up for tariffs and other kinds of customs requirements, not specific to agriculture. One other issue that we have is that this also enables people, instead of bringing in large shipments under, say, one entry filing, they can bring in many small parcels as long as they're under $800, which complicates our inspection paradigm and activities. This is also a very high speed, high volume pathway. The ECO business model, by default, and you know, we all benefit from this at times, is that packages, they make entry and are distributed to their final destination, sometimes within 24 hours. So that highlights the immense coordination that's really needed between ECO companies and the government and regulatory agencies to focus inspection on high-risk material or potentially smuggled material as effectively and efficiently as we can, kind of make sure that we are facilitating trade, but safe trade at the same time. One of the real advantages to this pathway that I don't think really trade gets enough credit for is that they are very engaged and interested in addressing this issue. More requirements or slower processing times is the worst possible thing that could happen to any of these express courier operations. So trade has come to the table in a number of instances to pilot solutions and ways to address kind of our e-commerce gaps. And I'll get into some of those pilots and those programs later in the presentation. But despite these challenges, again, kudos to CBP. They inspected over 250,000 ECO parcels in FY20 and issued over 15,000 emergency action notifications. We are present, we are inspecting, but the volume and the complexity of these pathways are really a disadvantage. So next slide. And so those are the pathways we're dealing with. There are also enforcement challenges. One of the things that I like to mention to people is that laws are only effective if people follow them. Want to highlight again, our regulations work if you follow them. Not everyone chooses to follow them, either due to a lack of awareness or to knowingly smuggle prohibited products into the country. So adding more regulations potentially could help us address certain gaps, but it might not be a solution, especially when you have people that are knowingly doing things to avoid inspection or avoid following our requirements. So since these are mostly direct-to-consumer purchases from foreign sellers, our enforcement posture is even more complicated. Most e-commerce buyers do not realize that they are responsible for ensuring U.S. requirements are met. That was also something that was very highlighted during the seed issues of last year. Most people did not realize it was their responsibility to get an import permit or to ensure there was a phytosanitary certificate for this material. And, you know, as the importer of the product, which is how we have typically kind of referred to the buyer, they are the importer, you know, going after that person for a penalty or a violation doesn't necessarily get to the source of the material, especially when this is, and for these instances when people aren't aware that they're supposed to be following certain requirements. So, you know, this also became, you know, a funny story was that we actually got certain packages in the mail for the unsolicited seeds, which were marked as jewelry or marked as other things. And some of them, these are the ones that got highlighted that weren't necessarily unsuspecting packages. These were things people had ordered that they called us out during all of the media coverage on the seeds. And they highlighted that they came with little notes from the exporter that said, these are called jewelry because we want to avoid inspection, which takes extra time. And so people know what, so some of these are knowingly violating our requirements, some of them are not, but it certainly highlights that this is a risk that we need to address. One of the other issues with enforcement is that foreign sellers are mostly unknown entities. It's very difficult to get information on sellers and sales data when you start getting into international privacy laws, and it's not impossible, but it's an added challenge. And when you think especially about US Postal Service, even when we're talking about advanced data, you know, you have an address for a recipient, you have a return address, you know where it was mailed from, but there's limits to what we can gain just at face value without a more in-depth look at compliance data and information from the companies themselves. So how are we addressing these issues? Because I've said the first few slides are going to sound a little bit troubling, and now we get into how we're addressing it. So next slide. This is not a simple fix. This is a conversation that is being had across the government. Multiple agencies that we routinely work with are asking themselves the same questions, and multiple governments. Now, we're working to address this by looking at increased enforcement or changes in our enforcement posture, how to leverage our involvement in both our international and interagency working groups, who are also very interested in this issue. And kind of surprisingly, most importantly, we're focusing heavily on engagement and outreach to inform both customers and the regulated entities about their requirements. This is, you know, a non-regulatory solution that we found has been very, very helpful, especially with the seeds issue over the last year. And we've been really surprised at the results, very pleasantly surprised at the results where companies have come to the table to address improved compliance. So now I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more. So next slide, please. So as many of you are aware, PPQ has been building a team of analysts focused on addressing e-commerce noncompliance. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. This team is led by Christian Rondeau, and their whole purpose is to monitor and analyze and identify internet sales of prohibited and restricted foreign products. They focus on high-risk products, as those are defined by APHIS and the agency, typically propagative material or things that can, bring in populations of a pest that could establish are considered higher risk of an import. Now, the results of these activities are traces, pieces of useful information that they basically carry through, analyze our import data, and lead to a significant number of seizures of these prohibited products that are being sold online. When we began this work really in earnest in 2010, you had about 290 traces and 300 seizures. And as we've added people to this team and gotten more efficient, last year we conducted, I think, over 2,000 traces and resulting seizures, which is a significant increase in productivity. I want to highlight that a lot of the benefit isn't just the seizures in these activities, it's the information that we're gathering when we do this work. This is information that we can pass on to CBP to enhance their targeting efforts and to build kind of more understanding as to what's coming into the country. So it really is kind of a self-fulfilling activity where we're getting more information, which is leading to other openings and opportunities. And we're very excited with advances in technology and access to more data and tools. Really, we feel that this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what this group is capable of achieving it related to this issue. So next slide, please. Next, we're heavily engaged in a lot of international work. John Greifer leads a lot of our international engagement with NAPO and the IPPC, and these groups have been very engaged in e-commerce. It's been a main focus of both our groups, the Quads group, which is a group made up of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, as well as the IPPC, which is a global work group or convention, more appropriately. So since 2017, e-commerce has really been a subject of close collaboration with our Quads partners. This early work in the Quads is now informing discussions at the IPPC global level. And we are comparing ideas and strategies with other regions in Europe as well through the European and Mediterranean plant protection organizations. The IPPC also has e-commerce as a priority, and it's listed specifically in the IPPC strategic plan for 2020 to 2030. And right now, the IPPC Commission established a dedicated working group that is developing a manual to help guide NPPOs on how to address e-commerce issues. Obviously, we all have different regulations and different requirements, but what are some of the common threads on how to address this issue at our borders, and maybe some best practices. So this covers not only monitoring and working with the e-commerce companies themselves, but also with the postal, ECO, and brokers that ship and move these products that are being bought and sold for e-commerce. And many of you know, I believe Corey Marker, he's spoken to the National Plant Board before. He's the subject matter expert working on these working groups, representing USDA in this issue. And lastly, IPPC is also strengthening its work with the World Customs Organization and other international entities to ensure that, as trade evolves and that our customs and our border practices are addressing really the rapid expansion of electronic commerce and the risk, the phytosanitary risk that brings with it. Next slide. Most excitingly for me is really the interagency collaboration that we have on this topic. And I think it's really key to finding solutions to this issue. We do a lot of work with Customs and Border Protection Office of Trade which is focused on bringing a lot of groups together to facilitate trade and find import solutions to certain issues. One of the things that we've been working on with the Office of Trade in terms of coordinating with the automated commercial environment, which is the main import system for electronic trade data. It's everything that comes into the country, that information goes in through that system. And what we've worked on over the last number of years was to mandate the receipt of electronic data for agricultural commodities. In March 2021, we mandated the requirement for electronic import data, known as the APHIS core message set. Typically, prior to this, people would kind of bring in their commodities with paper forms and documents, and some of that was translated into systems that we could access and do analysis on. But this is really a much more robust set of information, and it's complementary to the customs data that's received by CBP, and it's very APHIS specific. And I think the best way to describe how this is benefiting us is that we are getting species-specific scientific names for commodities, whereas previously we might get oranges or apples. And there's a lot of variation, especially when you get into nursery stocks and you start getting common names for that, that really help us to do more in-depth analysis on material that's coming into the country. And and really it's opened the doors in how we can adjust some of our analysis to use that data to better target risk. In addition, we're very heavily involved with the Border Interagency Executive Council, or BIC. And this is coordinated by Office of Trade as well, and it includes 47 partner government agencies that all have a role in import. It includes groups like the Food and Drug Administration, Consumer Product Safety Commission, and EPA, and we all have a role to play in import safety under our own authorities. Now, several of the initiatives that this group is working on are aimed at addressing the challenges of e-commerce and our ability to regulate small parcels in both the express courier and the US mail pathway. The first one is a new entry type that was created called entry type 86. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of things under $800 are de minimis shipments. There wasn't a way for brokers to file that information electronically because it didn't require, tariffs or other kinds of filing. So they developed this optional entry type. And by filling in this optional entry type, even though it's optional, we also get the APHIS core data associated with that entry. So it's increasing our visibility on what small parcels contain when they come into this country in advance of that shipment arriving. And brokers are very excited about this because I want to highlight that legitimate brokers, most of the brokers and importers are really doing things the right way. And they are very interested. They want faster and more transparent clearance for their customers' goods. And they want to be more visible and transparent about what they're bringing in because they don't have anything to hide. So it helps us kind of, promote things for those who want to follow the requirements so that we can focus efforts on where there is more risk, more inherent risk. As part of that entry pilot, there's also something called a 321 data pilot, and I apologize for all the numbers. But the goal of this pilot is to get more descriptive information directly from non-traditional e-commerce actors, such as marketplaces like Amazon. The pilot was initiated in 2019, and it provides more description data, such as a marketplace URL, when that product is arriving. So a good example would be you could get a import notification that a lily planter is arriving. Well, that could be a planter full of lilies, or it could be a potted plant with a lily painted on it. And you want to be able to focus your inspections on the one that has the propagative material, not necessarily on the one that is the ceramic planter. So again, it's just an added layer of information to help identify things that could be risky. And the more information we can get directly from these marketplaces, the more robust our efforts at inspection will be. CBP reported that in the fourth quarter of 2020, they got Section 321 pilot data on almost 25% of all cargo de minimis shipments. So that's really closing a gap where they didn't have a lot of eyes on information, and now they're getting even more robust information from trade. And finally, we're on a project known as One USG, One US Government Mail. As I mentioned earlier, CBP has mandated the receipt of electronic data for international mail. And this working group, led by USPS, is focused on making that data available for all government agencies for analysis and import targeting. So it really is not just benefiting us because our partners in CBP are already targeting for agricultural commodities, but really opening the doors for all government agencies to be more robust and look for things that are being smuggled or potentially trying to get into this country for better enforcement. And I do want to highlight in FY21 PPQ, my staff, we did hire a national policy manager, Melissa Thornton, to focus both on international mail policy and to better engage USPS and CBP on this pathway. And that's in addition to the people we have that are focused on cargo and the other parts of the import process. Next slide. And one of the biggest gaps we had in compliance is sadly the lack of awareness that the average customer had on USDA regulations and the fact that many online platforms were deferring liability to them. We are putting a lot of effort to raise awareness of this issue and to educate the consumer. In February, we updated the APHIS website to specifically address plant sales online and have provided a number of webinars to trade associations and partners on import requirements. Again, hammering home who the buyer is, who the seller is, and what are the requirements for these these plant shipments, and to really be more educated in where is your product coming from. I think most people assume it's coming from within the United States or that it's already met import requirements when they're purchasing it, and unfortunately, that has not been the case. I also want to highlight where Dr. Wayne Wheeling, who is an entomologist on our staff, will be appearing in a docuseries on Amazon television. And this is going to be focusing on the dangers of smuggling insects via the internet. This is also a big place where we've seen an uptick in illegal insect trade. I know we focus a lot on plants and animal products because of the risk, but bringing in illegal insects is really something that is increasing and something that's of concern, and we want to make sure that the public is educated on where the risks are there. And that's only the start of our public outreach. There's really a lot of work to be done. We are looking to develop a comprehensive outreach strategy on e-commerce as one of PPQ's strategic initiatives for FY22 and moving into the future. We feel it's been very, very effective so far, not just engaging with the public, but also engaging with trade directly on these issues. Next, please. And so finally, one of the more impactful developments over the last year has been our direct engagement with e-commerce companies, which were really extremely productive engagement. I think all of us went into these conversations expecting a lot more of an adversarial engagement. We were going to ask them to do things and they were going to kind of push back, and it really didn't turn out that way. They really found that this was a very collaborative discussions where they were interested in improving their compliance and were really open to hearing what we had to say and open to suggestions and ultimately made policy decisions voluntarily that better suited their business model. So as a product of these conversations, we've reported previously that Amazon and eBay changed their internal sales policies specifically to propagative material. One interesting fact that we had from eBay is that they applied filters that would highlight when people tried to post things for sale from foreign sites. And within the first couple of weeks of applying these filters, they stopped 150,000 listings, which is pretty amazing. The impact, it's a little, in some ways it's impressive, in some ways it's a frightening number, but it just shows how much of material from foreign sites was really coming on these e-commerce platforms. But these were significant improvements. They were achieved voluntarily. We do not have regulatory requirements specific to e-commerce, as again, we're not sure that that would really give us a higher level of compliance. But we can't rest on our laurels either. We can't assume that these companies will always be successful in managing compliance. So we still need to monitor them and engage them on different products and risk. We've made a lot of progress with seeds and propagated material. That's not the only APHIS regulated material that could potentially be for sale on their sites. So we need more from them, and we need to do more ourselves. One positive outcome from this engagement, which was unexpected, came out during the mothball and zebra mussels issues earlier this year. APHIS, for our authority, could not prohibit mothball imports. It's an admissible commodity if it comes in with requirements. However, we could engage Amazon and these companies on the fact that having this product on their sites violated their own internal sales policies. So, and to request that they be taken down, not because they were prohibited, but because their own policy prohibited the sale of plants on their site. So it really has kind of opened some avenues for future engagement for improved compliance. Next. And I want to highlight, this is all very much in process, so no one should get excited too soon. But in May of this year, we did have a significant court success related to e-commerce companies, related to their level of responsibility on what they host for sale. As I've said, the existing understanding is that an e-commerce site is just a site, and they're not responsible for what the seller and the buyer compliance. That's on the seller and the buyer, and that's how their policies and internal guidance is written. So APHIS did file suit against Amazon related to their violation of the Plant Protection Act and the Animal Health Protection Act. And the court found that Amazon, by moving this material, which is the terms that's used in our legislation, our statutory authority, that they were in violation of our requirements. And they did side in our favor. And that's a significant court battle, because a lot of what we're talking about is really relying on precedents. There's not a lot of precedents in terms of challenging some of these companies. Now, on July 20th of this year, Amazon did file an appeal, so we are still waiting to see if this holds up in court. But if it does open up some new discussions in terms of who is responsible and what onus does that put on e-commerce companies related to their activities. Other federal agencies are also challenging e-commerce companies on their level of responsibility. A recent case was taken up by Consumer Product Safety Commission related to dangerous products being sold online. So again, this is an avenue that we're pursuing, and we're interested in seeing where this is going and what how we approach it with e-commerce companies in the future. If we can make a case that they have to take more ownership on what is being hosted on their site and being imported into the country. So I have no idea if I went over. I have no idea if I'm way under. So hopefully there's time for questions, or I can answer them later this evening. Next slide. But that is what I wanted to share with you today. So I hope it addressed some of your questions, or maybe just created some more. So with that, I'll stop. So thank you.
Okay. Well, we do have 5 minutes in our break yet. So if folks want to hang on for a second, there were a few questions that popped up for you, Nicole. One was about the Amazon broadcast series. Do you know when that will be airing?
Not off the top of my head. I think it's in September, but I can get that information out to folks. We can make sure that's communicated.
Okay. And then there were two other questions, but they both related to essentially the same thing. So You're working with other e-commerce businesses, but are you also looking at Facebook Marketplace and other types of marketplaces like that as possibilities?
Yeah, we're looking at increasing our engagement with different companies to start conversations. It's a matter of, having some documented kind of documented sales and being able to kind of address this with them. Some of the marketplace direct discussion forums are more difficult for us to go into. We have a certain level of authority, and it's a matter of, what is the extent of how we can engage as a government agency to get some information. So these are all conversations that we're having with our investigative enforcement services and our legal counsel to see what exactly are our opportunities here, so that we make sure that we are approaching things carefully. But we are starting more conversations. We did reach out and have had very productive conversations with Etsy. And so, we are going to probably be reaching out most likely to Facebook and some other places like that to just initiate, as I said, the conversation, to let them know where our concerns are and why this is an issue. So I guess that's a yes answer and a maybe.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, well, those are all the questions for now, but if you're able to hang out, we are going to have a Q&A session again at 2:55, and we'll go ahead and send some more questions your way then.
All right, well, thank you everyone for having me.